I'm Frank Vaughn. It's June 18th, 2025, and the Oilers collapsed like a dying star last night. And that's the end of the hockey season, which maybe means people will be focused on more important things moving through the summer. One can dream. One of those things is a glimmer of hope out of Ontario with some caveats. First, what it is I'm talking about from Tracy Wilson of the CCFR Ontario Premier Doug Ford calls for castle laws, better self-defense regulations.
Ready to steal his car. They're all in their masks and everything. So I guess he was a hunter or something. He shot up in the air. I don't recommend that, by the way. But he gets charged. I got to find out this guy's name and number, and I'm going to hold a fundraiser for lawyer fees for him. He should get a medal for standing up. It's like down in the U.S., we should have the castle law. Someone breaks into your house, and I know any of these people here, someone breaks into your house, and they're coming after your kids, and you're coming after your spouse, you're going to fight like you've never fought before. You're going to use anything that you have.
Now, keeping in mind that Canadians do have a legal privilege of self-defense. Generally speaking, if you defend yourself, there's a process. You get charged with attempted murder or illegal use of a firearm, and you have to go through court, and it sucks. You pay a lot of money to prove that you were justified in saving your lives. We need castle laws. I welcome this call from Doug Ford, but I need to remind people this doesn't change anything. We are big believers on this channel in making sure that we maintain our perspective. This is the man who helped to torpedo the CPC and Pierre Poilievre in favor of Mark Carney, embraced Team Canada, canceled a bunch of contracts, virtue signaling with the United States, talked about shutting power off to millions of Americans, which would be a war crime, among other things. He came into office in 2018 on a promise to deal with Ontario's rapidly spiraling debt situation and fiscal burden, the problems of crime. He also talked about repealing, at the time, the absolutely perverse sex ed curriculum that is still in practice in Ontario, written by, the development of which was overseen by a convicted pedophile. That's Doug Ford. We don't want to forget that, and the reason we don't want to forget that is I talked in a previous video about the pivot that may come from the Liberal Party when it comes to self-defense and gun ownership, because they are looking for a way to shore up their numbers to guarantee their continued government if they do face an election. Now, they don't have to do much at the moment, and I don't know how much stock you can put in polls, but it certainly seems like CPC support is very much weakened since the election. There's a whole pile of Canada that seems to be happy with what Mark Carney's doing. Maybe it's because what Mark Carney's doing isn't all that dissimilar from what Pierre Poilievre would have done. I think vis-a-vis Trump, for example, I'm not sure there would have been much difference in approaches. The difference would be, of course, that the people who are calling Carney diplomatic now and applauding him and saying this is how you deal with a narcissist and a sociopath when they're talking about Trump would be condemning him for doing the same thing. Their hypocrisy knows no limits. I mean, look at my Twitter profile and read the responses to my posts. It's incredible. You can't even get upset about it. You can't even get angry. It's so stupid. At any rate, we have to remember that that's the same Doug Ford. Now, one of the utilities, and I talked about this in the money laundering video and the drug trafficking videos, and talking about the vast scale we're basically in northern Mexico. We have a huge cartel and crime problem. It can be expressed as a percentage of our GDP that is significant. So I've talked about this, and I talked about how decriminalizing hard drugs, making it so violent offenders are turned loose by the courts and thrown back out on the streets, it increases the crime rate. The Liberals have actively pursued policies that will increase violent crime and drug use in this country. They haven't sought to reduce it, they've sought to increase it. That's a fact. Bill C-75, which we went over recently, which is actually a law now, is just one such example of a bill they championed and passed, which made lives in Canada for the lawful that much more unsafe. However, Donald Trump came along. He highlighted, even if the Liberal voter is in complete denial about it, and even a lot of the Conservative vote base is in denial about it. Trump highlighted our fentanyl problem. He highlighted our drug export problem. When you examine this critically, you find out that Canada is internationally renowned as a drug trafficking clearinghouse to the world. 83% of Australian methamphetamine comes from Canada. We're exporting in every direction. If that's coming to an end, because the Americans and the Chinese are going to come to some kind of accord, and Canada is a satellite state, we are not completely dominated by any one nation yet. We are certainly not sovereign. The CCP operates with abandon here in Canada. The Americans have outsized influence on our economy, and now we're going to open ourselves up to the Europeans. Everybody wants a piece of Canada. And we have a prime minister now that is more than willing to give everybody what they want. But if the time has come that the Americans have called the Chinese out for their subtle warfare, their cultural warfare through DEI initiatives, funding all this stuff through the universities, creating cinema that's just trash, taking all of our cultural icons like the Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and just destroying them, and also the drug problem, which undermines everything. It undermines the underlying social fabric. It's not just the death and the cost to the economy. It's what it does to the family. They have been fighting a war where they are not able to fight kinetically, so they've been fighting through these psychological means. If their bluff has been called, and there's a new detente, there's a new trade arrangement, there's a new arrangement that understands that this cannot go on for any longer, then Canada's fundamental function as a satellite state changes. So it could very well be that this government genuinely intends to kick the drug problem, genuinely intends to kick the violence problem, genuinely intends to solidify the borders because, not just because the Americans want it, but because the Chinese are going to want it too, in order to secure their deal with the United States. So how does this all tie into Doug Ford? Because it will no longer make sense to target legal, lawful gun owners. It would actually make sense to empower them if the need for legalized hard drugs and if the need for violence all over the place to hide, and that's what it does. It runs cover for the vast scale of criminal enterprise in Canada. If you put crime everywhere, if you put drug addiction everywhere, it's hard to see what's actually happening. Those websites, which they're now busting. This is evidence to my thesis. The websites that have been operating in Canada that would ship cocaine and ketamine to your door, among other drugs, through the mail system, bragging about its security, people buying by credit card, never facing criminal charges. Now, all of a sudden, this government is looking to do warrantless database entry. So they find these websites, they go to the database, they get your name, your number, and your credit card, they get your purchase history, and could even potentially charge you retroactively. This is what the Liberal government's talking about. It looks to me like there's a change in policy on the horizon. Slow-rolled for political purposes. But that could mean, remember, Doug Ford is a satellite of Mark Carney. He's not some kind of champion or hero. None of that stuff changes. But if he's out there talking about castle laws, then there could be relief on the way for the Canadian gun owner, and there could be relief on the way for anybody who just wants to protect their life and property, because it now suits the objectives of the people who rule Canada, which is certainly not you, and it's certainly not the Parliament that you elect. And let's just do a quick reminder of who the actual rulers of Canada are. They are foreign investment firms. They're foreign nations who have interests here because Canada's been converted into a big fat resource colony that they take advantage of. And Bill C-5 is designed for their advantage. The thing that I would like to focus on today as regards Bill C-5 is regulatory bypass. The Governor and Council, once again, the ruler of Canada is not Parliament. The government of Canada is the Prime Minister and Cabinet appointed by Parliament and the Governor General. The Governor General is arguably the most powerful figure in our federation. And what this is going to allow Carney to do, as he's a pioneer already of using governor and council powers, orders in council, C-5 will allow him to, with the signature of the Governor General, bypass Canadian laws and regulations. So for specific projects that Mark Carney likes, with the stroke of a pen, no vote of Parliament, no vote of Cabinet even, just the stroke of the Governor General's pen at the behest of the Prime Minister, he can order any company from anywhere in the world that wants to build a project here in Canada to be completely exempt from our laws to develop on our land without any parliamentary oversight. That is Bill C-5. I'm telling you, and I told you before the guy was elected, he is here as an autocrat to steer this country more into the hands of those who take advantage of it, more into its role as a resource colony. I await eagerly the details that are going to come out of I'm sure it's already done, except the I's being dotted and the T's being crossed, this trade agreement with the United States. And I think you're going to be shocked by what Carney gives away. And as much as I would like to believe the Liberal voter could wake up from their malaise and their delusion, when faced with it, they'll probably just keep on pretending everything is tickety-boo and fine, because within their four walls, within their social media, within their echo chambers, oftentimes I picture it as people going from their home to work and back home, and at all points in between and at all points in the evening, they're just on their cell phones reinforcing their biases. They don't see the real world going on outside. When they hear the gunshots out their window, and they see the signs of decline, they just put the blinders on. They just keep their heads down as they're walking down the sidewalk. They're on that smartphone. I remember back in Ontario, and my understanding is Ontario hasn't changed much. There's a lot of people still wearing masks. But the last time I was in Toronto, nobody looked up anymore. Nobody met eyes. There was no engagement. And I was even seeing that more and more in the small town that I lived in. Bill C-5 is bad, but we got to move on because we have things to talk about. We do have to turn our attention back to the Middle East and Trump and Israel and the entire show that's going on over there right now, because I believe we are imminently going to see U.S. involvement. You don't reposition this much firepower from all around the world without intending to do something with it. So that time is coming. Mark it on the calendar. But I want to talk about Turkey. And if you've been paying attention and watching my stuff for a long time, I've said that Turkey is the thorn in NATO's side. It is the poison pill. It's the Trojan horse. They should have never been allowed to join. But I do understand why decades ago it made sense to let Turkey come in. The fact that they're in NATO now might actually undermine and destroy the alliance at some later date. Erdogan says Iran has legitimate right to defend itself against Israel's thuggery, compares Netanyahu to Hitler. He actually said that the thuggery and state terrorism, that Netanyahu had surpassed Adolf Hitler in committing crimes. It's a good thing to remember that Turkey had a very good relationship with Nazi Germany, similar to West Ukraine. We're talking about a similar style, similar history, and it's good to keep that in mind. The Turks don't like the Jews. And I think it is very telling that Western media is really downplaying this, because if these comments came from a German leader, if these comments came from Starmer, if they came from France, if they came from any other nation, there would be a very different reaction in the media. But they came from Turkey, so it's muted. And the reason it's muted is because Turkey's very inconvenient, particularly Erdogan. He is very inconvenient and hard to cover for the Western media, so they just pretend this problem doesn't exist. Clearly, Netanyahu and the military operation in Gaza has led to tens of thousands of civilian casualties and a lot of suffering. That's not something I want to diminish. But comparing it to the Holocaust and comparing it to what Germany unleashed in the Second World War on all of Europe, it's a non-starter for anybody with two brain cells that they can knock together. But what's really at stake here and what's really disturbing to me is that Turkey is a NATO member, and Turkey occupies a swath, as you can see in the map, of northern Syria. Their plans for expansionism are pretty focused, intently focused on Syria right now. Israel also has occupied forever, according to Netanyahu, the Golan Heights. And I think that caught in between is Jolani, who is the ISIS-affiliated leader of Syria, even as we're talking, even as Israel is arresting ISIS-affiliated people within its country. The Americans, the Israelis, the global community is enabling Jolani, who is literally ISIS, with hundreds of millions of dollars in an open phase because Western money helped finance ISIS into existence in the first place. For anybody who's been paying attention and has a mind for history. At any rate, he's sandwiched. He's a useful buffer between Israel and Turkey, which is a conflict that's coming over the horizon, actually. Because once Iran is dealt with, you have to ask yourself, what's next? And what's next is the Turkish problem. At least if I'm analyzing things from the Israeli perspective, it's one target after another target. They're dealing with the immediate threat was Hamas. The next threat was Hezbollah. And they move on and on down the list, and now we're on to Iran. What comes next? It's got to be Turkey. Now, Turkey is a NATO member. If Israel and Turkey start clashing over Syria, there is a remote chance that Article 5 will be invoked, which is the Mutual Defense Clause. I don't think anybody in NATO is going to honor that on Turkey's behalf, which makes you question what it's in there, what's its worth anyway. I mean, it was designed to just deal with Soviet Russia a long time ago, but they could also invoke Article 4, which is consultations whenever a nation's territorial integrity. It won't go anywhere. But it creates a politically inconvenient problem for NATO if and when this actually happens. I'm not sure if it's if or if it's when. I have to think about it more. But for the moment, Jolani serves as a buffer. Now, I want to remind people, too, Greece PM rips Turkey as thousands of migrants seek entry into Europe. This goes all the way back to 2020, but this was going on in 2017 and earlier on when the migrant crisis was really capturing national headlines. Millions of people were entering into Europe, a problem that they're still dealing with, a demographic problem that is ongoing for sure, and driving the rise of those who want to get out of the EU. But the fact is, Turkey used opening its borders and flooding Greece with migrants as a threat, not just to Greece, but to Europe in general, saying that they would, if they didn't get what they wanted, they would flood Europe with migrants as an act of revenge. This is a nation in a pro-European alliance, NATO. This is a nation that is supposed to be friendly, blackmailing Europe. And this is just one of those things that people should hold in their mind. At the same time, we got pro-Iran protests erupt across Iraq amid escalating Israel-Iran war. Things are far from simple. If we go back to Google Earth for a minute, we have a lot of... I'm moving myself around. The collective hate for Israel in the region cannot be underestimated, and the longer the war goes on, the more emboldened Israel's haters are going to be. And it should be noted that this proxy war that I'm talking about, well, I'm talking about the risk of an actual conflict arising where Turks and Israelis are engaged in killing each other, but there's a proxy war that's ongoing in Syria as we speak. This is from the 5th of April. Israel said to bombard 3 air bases in Syria where Turkey intended to deploy forces. Syrian source, T4 airfield, totally unusable now. Ankara says, not seeking conflict with Israel amid planned defense pact with Damascus. We don't want Turkey on our borders. So the Turks want to cement a deal with Jolani, and they want to put their forces, they want to put their troops inside of Syria, and that was their plan. And ahead of that plan, Israel destroyed all of the infrastructure so they could not do that. It doesn't get closer to an open, hot conflict over the future of Syria than that. Right now, Israel is busy bombing the hell out of Iran, but there's going to come a point where the focus shifts back to Syria. Like I said before, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I really think that Jolani is just filling a vacuum right now, and he will be sacrificed later by Israel, the West, and, for that matter, Turkey, if it becomes convenient to do so. There might be a reason for Jolani to invite Turkish troops in. And there's every reason to expect that Erdogan might accept that in spite of international condemnation and protest from the West and Israel, who he might perceive as powerless to stop it, and he might be right. But that would bring Turkish troops and Israeli troops facing each other across a very thin border. It also might encourage Israel to just seize Damascus themselves. They're very close and could do so very easily. So anyway, this is not something that's on anybody's radar, so I'd like to put it on your radar. So we got to do some counter-narrative coverage because we're being flooded with the story that Israel is masterfully handling everything, and they are. They're bombing the living hell out of Iran, and they control the skies over Iran, but they are taking sustained damage on the home front, and their inventory of missiles, Israel running low on missile interceptors as Iran proves a stronger foe than expected. Details: according to an individual briefed on U.S. and Israeli intelligence, Israel is on pace to run out of defensive missiles in 10 to 12 days. Another article from the Economic Times: Iran is no pushover, Israel is learning the hard way. So there was a point in the conflict where Iran was firing 100 to 200 missiles a day, and then they slowed down. Now, you could read this, and I don't know how to read this because I'm not there. I'm not on the ground. You could read this as Israel is neutralizing their ability to launch, or you could read it as Iran is choosing to dole them out more slowly to trigger these defense systems and weaken them before they fire all their big stuff. Now, we don't know how many of their prime missiles, their cruise missiles, their Khamenei's, their new missiles that they keep talking about, we don't know if it's all bluff that they're putting out or if they're actually holding back something, waiting to see what the U.S. does too, because that's the other thing. Iran's stance in the eyes of the Russians and the Chinese and the various aspects of the international community that's actually interested at all in what they're doing, Iran is under sustained bombardment. Civilian casualties are mounting. Civilian targets are being hit. TV stations and radio stations are being bombed, which you could argue are war crimes. This is all happening in Iran. Meanwhile, Iran's response so far has been muted. They haven't closed the strait. They haven't fired 1,000 missiles, whether they have the capability or not. I'm just saying they have not done it for one reason or another. There's a lot of things that they could arguably do that are feasible, that you could feasibly guess that they could do that they have not done. And this could be trying to maintain some semblance of self-control in the face of mounting pressure so that it obliges the other nations in the area, the other nations of the world, to actually have some sympathy for Iran. That could be their calculus. They could also just not be able to fire these missiles. But the point is, that I'd like to make is that if Israel is indeed risking running short of their anti-missile defenses in the next 10 to 12 days, it would make sense for Iran to hold back what they can hold back and then fire at a later date so as to maximize damage. It could be their strategy. It's basically what they're talking about in their public releases. Whether they're full of baloney or not, I don't know. But I do know that these things are going to come to a head in the not-so-distant future, especially if the Americans enter. I think American entry means that Iran will be no longer incentivized to mute their own response, if indeed they're muting their response. If they have the capacity, we'll find out. There's also the fact that Israel is doing more and more and getting more and more active, arresting people for posting videos of damage on social media. They are saying they're doing it because those posts might give away the locations of their military installations. But anybody with Google Earth, and specifically Iran, with 27 years of preparation, they probably already know where everything is. So I think the excuse is a little bit loose. But when you see videos like this, Israeli defenses are not foolproof and not as foolproof as they're indicating. There's also rumors that American B-2s are already flying missions, Maybe not direct bombing, but flying missions over Iran. I don't know if that's true. But I did read an estimate of total Israeli damage so far to Israel running at about $2 billion US dollars. Now, of course, damage to Iran and the global economy. Iran is now threatening to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, that no tanker traffic will pass through the strait except with their express permission. They could mine it. They could totally disrupt the global economy to the tune of hundreds of billions, even trillions of dollars. But the fact is, mounting Israeli casualties and mounting Israeli damage is going to take a toll on Netanyahu's ability to prosecute the conflict as it goes on, especially if the Iranians are holding back and Israel runs short of missile defenses. But that's it for this video. I'm Frank Vaughn. I will see you in the next one.